From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. And coming up today, K-State's Monte Vandeveer will invite you forage and grassland managers to look at the USDA's Pasture, Rangeland and Forage Insurance program as a way of managing the risk of drought losses to your resources. The deadline for enrolling in this coverage for next year is a week from this Friday. Also today, K-State's Mike Tokach joins Britton Rucker to talk about the ongoing response of swine researchers to the threat of African swine fever. That'll be one of the featured topics at the 2019 K-State Swine Day, coming up in a couple of weeks. And later on, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, along with much more here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
As always, we're glad to have you along with us for Agriculture Today. Well, a week from this Friday, November the 15th, is a date of note for you grassland managers. It's a key deadline for taking advantage of a risk management tool provided by the USDA. And filling us in now on that, Monte Vandeveer. He is a K-State Research and Extension agricultural economist based in southwest Kansas and works with risk management tools and associated topics on behalf of producers. What we're talking about, Monte, is the Pasture, Rangeland and Forage Insurance program. This has been around for a few years, has it not?
Yes, it was started probably 15 years ago, but it's been in Kansas for at least 10 years now. Our producer sign-up, though, is still pretty modest, and so we want to keep talking about it. And
we want to spell out the mechanics of it as we go along here. Rangeland, pasture, forage, those are the insurable products here under this program, right?
Yeah, grazing lands, and that means permanent pastures, and haying lands, that's perennial hay crops. So that would be like established alfalfa or grass meadows cut for hay. This is not coverage for annual forages. So if we make hay out of our wheat crop or our forage sorghum, for example, they have another insurance product for that.
And is it similar in how it operates to what we know in familiar terms as crop insurance?
Yeah, it's sold by the same crop insurance agents, the local folks that people deal with their traditional crop insurance, the revenue coverage and yield coverage plans that probably 90% of our crop acres are insured. That's still the same. Another thing that's the same is the government pays a significant share of the premium, starting at 51% all the way up to 59%, depending on which coverage level you select.
But how this pasture, rangeland, and forage coverage differs from crop insurance, well, how it's calculated, as we know, crop insurance is based on yields and those official yield numbers, but we do not typically collect that kind of information from our pastures and our hay ground.
Right. We don't have the long-term yield histories, so we can't really do our risk assessment on that basis. I mean, premiums have to be, and the coverage has to be based on something else. And so RMA came up with what they call a rainfall index. And the index is just what percent of average rain or precipitation happened within any particular 2-month time period. So, for example, June and July, we know the normal rainfall for a particular location. And if actual rainfall comes in below, say, 90% of that average, then the insurance can trigger a payment.
And producers on that point can actually choose their guarantee as far as the range of rainfall below a threshold.
Right. The guarantees start at 90%, but you can choose coverage as low as 70%. Now, that's the percent of the long-term average precipitation. And so remember, that's just a single peril, too. We're not insuring any of the other factors that might reduce forage production. We're just guaranteeing against that low rainfall outcome.
Now, what's more interesting is how that local rainfall trend is identified here. And it would be extremely difficult to do this ranch by ranch, farm by farm. So the USDA has come up with a system, if you will, of determining the average rainfall for a given location.
Yeah, they actually just went straight to NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the federal weather folks, we might say. NOAA has what they call their Climate Prediction Center, and so they were already using a system that RMA and PRF just borrowed from. It uses a grid system or an area-based system, and so it defines these grids. They're quarter-degree longitude by quarter-degree latitude. So that comes out to be about 17 miles or so north to south, 13 or 14 miles east to west in Kansas. And they picked the official government rainfall stations, at least 4 that are the closest to that grid area, and then they do a weighted average rainfall. And the stations that are closest count the most in that weighting scheme.
So it really is simpler than it might sound and gives a representative idea of what the rainfall expectations would be in a given location. And then producers, as they decide to enroll, they need to make some decisions here, don't they?
Yes, I think that's been one of the challenges with PRF is this part of the coverage is a lot more complex, I guess, when you have a lot more choices going on there. And first of all, the producers have to select which time periods, which of these 2-month intervals through the year that they want to insure. So I mentioned June, July before, so that's one interval. They have to pick at least 2 of those 2-month intervals. And once they do that, then they also have to decide how to split out their dollars of coverage between those intervals, between those time periods. So that's kind of a challenging, decision, deciding, well, should I put all my coverage in the growing season? Our range science tells us pretty strongly that that's the time that has the greatest impact on forage production. That's when rainfall is most important. But other producers use this strategy. They'll spread their coverage across the entire year just because it gives them a better chance of collecting a payment.
Now, in a moment, we want to inform folks about some really helpful resources to allow them to assess this coverage, how it might work for them. The program has been around for several years, 15, as you say, Monte. This past season, 2019, as we all know, pretty wet year in the better part of Kansas, so this may not be a good year to compare, but looking back over the last several years, how well has the Pasture, Rangeland, and Forage Insurance coverage performed in times of dry weather or outright drought?
Well, I've looked at a number of grids across the state. I know out here in western Kansas, if you pick the 90% coverage level, even in the summer months when rainfall is highest, you'd hit that 90% threshold in over 40% of the years. Then in the winter months when rainfall is much less, some months even pay out close to that 60% mark. So it does pay out over time. If you look at how the payouts come over, say, a long period of time, 20 years or more, most of the grids that I've looked at will indicate that you get about $1.50 to $2 back for every dollar that you pay in premium. Of course, that's a reflection of the premium subsidy. And that's one of the features that of the decision tools we have online is you can look up those numbers for your grid.
Let's talk of that then. This is at the Risk Management Agency website, and folks can go to that and put to use an online decision tool which can plug in all of those factors of interest to them.
Right. On the RMA webpage, the home page, that's rma.usda.gov, One of their highlighted programs is Pasture, Rangeland and Forage. Or you could just Google something like RMA PRF coverage, and the link would be right there toward the top of the list. So you can find it pretty easy. That web page has, a link to the fact sheets and all the background information, how these grids are designed and the weather system and all that. And then it has a link there also to that decision tool. And the decision tool lets you look up your own grid and lets you make all those coverage choices, like how many dollars of coverage you want per acre, which time periods you want to check out, how to spread the coverage across the year. And the tool will tell you then, give you an estimate of the premium costs. And it'll also show you how the coverage would have paid out in a particular bad year. A lot of times I'll look at the 2012 drought year, see how the coverage I selected would have paid for that grid, in what we know was a really bad year.
So that tool really can spell it out for a producer before they make their decision on enrollment. Again, that's at rma.usda.gov. Monte, it, by the sound of it, is something that you would like to see more producers at least evaluate as to its potential help to them as a risk management tool, if not outright take advantage of it by enrolling.
Right. It's something I hope producers will look at. Every year we see in the farm press, wherever drought happens to hit, we'll see a story of a producer who will say something like, I spent 20 years building up my cow herd, and now I've got to sell because I don't have anything to feed them. Mm-hmm. And this is a tool to help producers avoid situations like that. So they can, at least it's worth checking out to see if it makes sense for their operation.
Very well. And once more, the deadline for enrolling for 2020 coverage is a week from this Friday, November the 15th. Monte, thanks for bringing this to our attention. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Eric.
Monte Vandeveer with us via phone from his office in Garden City, K-State Research and Extension agricultural economist based in southwest Kansas, with the ins and outs on the USDA Pasture, Rangeland and Forage Insurance coverage. Again, check out the full details at rma.usda.gov. And we'll be back with more on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. Research updates are the cornerstone of Kansas State University's annual Swine Day, planned for Thursday, November 21st. With me now, diving more into this event, is K-State Swine Extension Specialist Mike Tokach. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
This event truly covers multiple aspects of the swine industry.
Yes, this has really been our highlight of the year for us at K-State. It gives us an opportunity to reconnect with our producers and get everybody together for a fun event while educating them about all the research that we've done at the university in the previous year, as well as talking about some of the major events going on and activities around the world that impact their bottom line.
Now run us through real quick of the itinerary plan for this day.
Well, this is on Thursday, November 21st. We start off bright and early in the morning at 8 o'clock with the trade show, and that's one of the events that I think the producers really enjoy, seeing what's going on, what the new products that are being offered in the industry, what some of our vendors, whether it be feed suppliers, genetic suppliers, equipment suppliers, that they're bringing to the market. And then we start up shortly after 9 o'clock with our new department head. Dr. Mike Day is going to give the introduction for Swine Day. And then we lead right in a very fast-paced morning session where we cover a wide variety of research topics. That's where we really highlight all of the research that we've done in the previous year. And it starts off in terms of the sow side, and we try to walk our way through each of the segments of production. So in the sow area, Dr. Jason Woodworth is going to cover the recent amino acid research that we've done and the work that we've done with trying to reduce stillbirth rate and trying to reduce pre-weaning mortality with some very large field-based studies that we've done in Nebraska and in Minnesota in the last few years. After that, Dr. Bob Goodband is going to cover some of the work with high-protein DDGS. And so high-protein distillers grains are now being offered around the country, kind of a new phase of the ethanol production. We're starting to see them on the market here in Kansas, and we've done several trials in the last year, and some that we've just recently finished up, trying to determine the value of these high-protein distillers grains and the best way to formulate and use them in diets. And so that begins our program. We then will transition into some of the work with mycotoxin mitigation. Last year in our corn crop, we had some problems with fumonisin, and I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've done to look at mitigants, some of the products that can be added to diets to help to deal with that problem. After I finish up on the program, Cassie Jones is going to talk about some of the feed safety things, and Joel Derucci is going to talk about feed additives, and so covering a wide gamut. And then we'll finish up that program with Steve Dreetz talking about African swine fever and certainly some of the impact that it's having around the world. And he's had the opportunity to travel to Vietnam and see at firsthand what's going on there, both there and in China in terms of the African swine fever. And he's going to bring back some of the lessons that he's learned and then also tie it back to some of the biosecurity things that we need to do on our farms here in the United States to help keep ourselves free. That also ties us into the last part of our afternoon program, that when we talk about these invited speakers, we brought in this year Egan Brokoff. Dr. Brokoff is a veterinarian from Western Canada. He's been very instrumental in helping to put together the program that they have in Canada to try to prevent African swine fever from coming into their swine industry. And he's going to talk about some of the aggressive steps that they've taken with feed ingredients in terms of imports and in terms of how they're trying to put together a program to be ready in case African swine fever does hit anywhere in North America or South America, and steps that we may be able to take to prevent it from moving into our countries.
And it's a very big concern within the United States. Now, as a professional, what is your perspective of the disease?
Well, it can't be understated just how important this disease is. If you look at African swine fever, there's for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's a disease that's been around a long, long time in Africa. It was in Europe at one time, and they were able to eliminate it over a very, very long, drawn-out process. But it's now moved its way back up into Western Europe, just briefly, but mostly Eastern Europe, and then moved into Asia. It went into Russia through the wild pig population. It's been able to move from country to country and move down into China. And the biggest problem with this disease is that there's no vaccine available for it. And it's a slow-moving disease, but when it does come into a herd, it's basically almost 100% fatal. And so in the domestic pig population, if they get this disease, they basically die. And so you want to prevent it from coming in. One of the biggest problems that it has from a trade perspective is it is a foreign animal disease which stops trade. If we had it break in the United States, all of our export market would end. And that we right now export a little over 25% of our pork in the United States, and so it would be a devastating impact on our industry. The one thing about African swine fever that is really scaring people is how it's moving now around the world. When you talk about China, China has 50% of the pigs in the world. And so when you think about a disease impacting an industry that large, and when they have 50% of the pigs in the world, the U.S. has about 10% of the pigs in the world. And so you can see about the differences in the size of those industries. If you think about this from a realistic perspective, there's a thought that half of the industry in China is going to be lost due to this disease. That happens, it's basically 25% of the pigs in the world gone, which that has important implications not only to our swine industry and our exports and the importance of their growing demand for pork, but also it spills over into our beef production, into poultry production, into basically every kind of meat production because of the increased demand that they have in China for protein intake.
Now, what is the likelihood of this disease entering the United States?
Well, there are some major concerns with it. One of the ways that it's moved, I said, is with wild pigs. Mm-hmm. The other way that it's moved is with pork products. It is a quite stable virus that will live in cured pork products. And so people bringing something into the United States, either intentionally or unintentionally, is what the biggest concern is. If you follow pork headlines, Australia has telling people that they test products products that they find at their airports that have been coming in, meat products that have come out of Asia, and they're just under 50% of those products are testing positive for ASF. And one of the theories of how it's moved into Western Europe is that it's moved in through pork products that somebody discarded on the side of the road that was then ate by a wild pig. And so that's what our concern is with airplanes, with cruise ships, with transportation that people move so much around the world today. I think it's more of the concern about doing something inadvertently, bringing something in that whether they know it's bad or not, that is an infected product that then is discarded and is consumed by a wild pig is the most likely way that it would get in. The other way that we know that their diseases can be transmitted through feed, and so feed ingredients is an area that we're putting a lot of emphasis and a lot of research into.
What are you doing in that aspect of ensuring that African swine fever doesn't enter the U.S.?
Well, the American Association of Swine Veterinarians and the Swine Health Improvement Center has partnered with a number of groups around the U.S., including Kansas State University, to try to look at ways to mitigate bringing something in through a feed ingredient. So one of the things that we're doing with our ingredient suppliers is with the vitamin suppliers, some of the amino acid suppliers that have supplies coming out of China, is that we're working to have holding times. Basically, that we know that these viruses, even if they are able to get into a feed ingredient, that if you give them enough time, the viruses will disappear over time and die off. And so if we have a holding time, we can prevent even an infected product from infecting a pig. So we're holding those ingredients in warehouses and working with our suppliers to do that. One of the areas that does concern us in the swine industry a great deal is the use of organic soybeans. One of the main places that we've imported organic soybeans from is from China. And those organic soybeans often don't undergo some of the holding times that we're talking about with vitamins, with trace minerals, with amino acids. And those soybeans have been proven that if something did infect them, they have the ability to sustain that virus much longer than almost any other ingredient. Something about the protein content and the dry matter content of soybeans and soybean meal make it a good place for viruses to live a long time if they do find their way into them.
Now, Mike, is there a protocol if African swine fever does reach U.S. soil?
There's a number of things that have been going on in the swine industry to try to prepare for that, hoping that it never happens. The Kansas Department of Agriculture has worked regionally with a number of other states, and the Kansas Pork Association has been quite heavily involved with our local veterinarians, putting plans in place, thinking about how stop movement will happen, because that's the first step would be we would stop all movement, trying to contain the disease as quickly as possible with the hope of eradicating it before it moves to other operations. So early detection becomes the very, very critical piece, and that early detection would hopefully allow us to contain it. We're obviously spending a lot of our time working on trying to prevent it from coming here so we don't have to deal with what happens once it would reach our shores.
Now, all this and more at the K-State Swine Day. Mike, where can people find more information and where to register?
Yes, if you go to ksuswine.org, that's ksuswine.org, you can find the registration link there, or you can contact Lois Schreiner, and Lois's phone number is 785-532-1267. That's 785-532-1267, and Lois would take your registration. Registration is $25 in advance and $50 at the door. We do hope that people would register by November 12th. We would encourage all those that can make it to attend. It'll be at our Alumni Center here on campus at Kansas State University.
Well, Mike, thanks again for being here and discussing the swine industry as well as the K-State Swine Day.
All right, thank you.
That is Mike Tokach, Swine Extension Specialist at K-State. Once again, K-State Swine Day is set for Thursday, November 21st at the K-State Alumni Center. Registration is available online, as are more details on this event at ksuswine.org. I'm Britton Rucker, and this is Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Next up, today's agricultural news headlines, these courtesy in part of DTN. And the first item tying back to Britain's conversation with K-State's Mike Tokach a few moments ago, the pork shortage in China caused by African swine fever continues to overcome the high import tariffs for U.S. pork heading to the Chinese market. That's according to the president and CEO of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Dan Hallstrom said yesterday he was, quoting here, feeling pretty upbeat about our export markets right now, as beef, pork, and lamb are picking up momentum. Now, breaking it down overall, beef exports are expected to end 2019 largely even in exports compared to 2018, but the Federation projects 5% growth in 2020. Pork exports are up a minimum 10% compared to 2018, says the Federation. Pork exports next year are projected to grow another 13%. Hallstrom said those figures could be conservative for pork exports. The Federation update came as Canadian officials announced yesterday that China would resume imports of Canadian beef and pork. Even as pork prices have escalated for Chinese consumers, the Chinese government had banned imports of Canadian beef and pork since June over what the Chinese government alleged were forged export certificates. Now, despite the retaliatory tariffs from China, now at 72% against U.S. pork, the sales to China were still at record levels in July and August, according to the Federation numbers. They expect that kind of growth to continue in 2020. The U.S. is competing with countries that have just 12% export duties going into China. The U.S. has about 13% of the China pork import market. The senior vice president for the Meat Export Federation, Joel Haggard, says that while pork exports are growing, they could grow much more rapidly without the punishing 72% tariff. House Agriculture Committee Chairman Colin Peterson is asking the USDA to address several issues with the latest market facilitation program trade mitigation package, including crops that are not eligible for aid and the formula for determining payments to dairy producers. That follows questions raised by dairy producers as to why their payments are based on historical and not actual production. The current program has created winners and losers among neighbors who find themselves facing the same market situations, meaning that some producers may remain viable while others may be forced out of business. Those were Peterson's words in a letter to USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue. He also pointed out that the MFP2 payments do not account for the impact on basis that have resulted from disruptions in trade flows. He called on Perdue to strongly consider rectifying the situations as he contemplates the next rounds of assistance under the MFP program. And the U.S. is debating whether to roll back tariffs deployed on around $112 billion of Chinese imports, according to the Financial Times, with the Wall Street Journal reporting that both countries are considering tariff reductions as they work out the finalization of the Phase 1 trade deal. The initial focus was on the U.S. not importing tariffs on Chinese goods on December the 15th, but the reports now suggest that duties put in place by the U.S. back on September the 1st may also be in play. Should the U.S. agree to do more than just not impose those tariffs in mid-December, the Financial Times said the U.S. would likely seek something in response from China, including beefed-up provisions on the protection of intellectual property for U.S. companies, greater certainty on the scale of Chinese purchases of U.S. agricultural products, and a signing ceremony for the agreement on American soil. There has been no confirmation of the tariff discussions from the Chinese side. Trade consultations have made progress and are advancing in accordance to plan. Those are the words of Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zheng Xiang as he spoke with reporters in a briefing. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has pushed pause on the Quivira impairment remedy. Scarlett Higgins reports here that this is good news, but there is still work to be done.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recently announced it would not make a request for water to the state of Kansas for the Quivira National Wildlife Refuge in fiscal year 2020. The chief engineer of the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Water Resources issued a decision in 2016 that the agency's Quivira water right was being impaired by junior water users in the Rattlesnake Creek Basin. This latest announcement means the chief engineer will not send his recently proposed administrative orders restricting water use to water right owners in the basin. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service indicated it would continue to work to find local, voluntary, collaborative, and non-regulatory solutions, including augmentation, to address the water needs of the community and the wildlife conservation purposes of the refuge before determining if more formal measures are necessary to ensure the refuge's water rights are secured. While the temporary pause is good news, much work remains to be done on a compromise solution, as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service also announced it expects all water users to develop concrete milestones and lasting solutions. I'm Scarlett Hagans.
On the calendar, in anticipation of the next calving season, the K-State Department of Animal Sciences and Industry and K-State Research and Extension will be hosting a series of calving schools here in November and running through January. These will outline the normal calving processes as well as tips to handle difficult calving situations. K-State Research and Extension beef veterinarian A.J. Tarpoff will be supervising these. He says the purpose is to increase knowledge and practical skills and to increase the number of live calves born. They'll be sharing tips on when and how to intervene to assist the cow or heifer, how those times may be different when dealing with the younger heifers, and presenters will also demonstrate proper use of calving equipment on a life-size scale with the goal for producers to leave better prepared for the calving season, according to AJ. They'll talk about timelines on when to examine cows for calving problems and when to call for help if things are not going well. The list of meetings: Tuesday the 19th in Council Grove, Tuesday the 10th of December in Cherokee, Oklahoma, also Thursday the 9th of January in Edwards County, and then the next one will be January the 14th on a Tuesday. That'll take place in Ottawa. Thursday, January the 16th in the Lane County Fair Building in Dighton. Thursday, January the 16th as well, taking place in Trego County, Waukene. And then the last one, Thursday, January the 23rd in Salina. Ask your local extension office for more information about these or check that out at ksubeef.org. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
I saw my work as a catalyst.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Kansas State Extension recently held its annual conference here in town. I had planned to go to the so-called get-together to meet old colleagues and friends, but I did not make it. To be honest, I forgot. Notice I did not say to be very honest. That expression, very honest, has always baffled me. Can one be a little honest? To me, it's very simple. You're honest or you're not. Another factor is that colleagues have retired. I retired in 2000, and there is now a new generation of extension agents. Soon, all my friends and colleagues will have retired or start to do other things. As time has gone by, extension delivery is changing, and looking at it, I'm very glad I worked in extension when I did. I was on the road, out in the state. I have plenty of good memories of battling snow and ice on western Kansas roads, as well as the mud on county roads. It was a time when county agents, would trail you through my good secretaries. There were no cell phones. The county agents, would always find you because Christy, my secretary, would know where I was. It was a time when extension was really with the people. Wintertime was the time of workshops, and you tried to hold several in close neighborhoods, counties, to eliminate unnecessary driving. You would visit nurseries as it was their slack time. As the horticulture state specialist, I had responsibilities for landscape and environmental horticulture. The job suited my temperament as well as my background and training. I enjoyed it, helping people and helping communities. The landscape questions were improvement around the courthouse, the local cemetery, schools, farmsteads, layout to city parks, residences, and more, much more. Some requests for help and advice were very interesting. It was important to me that people realized I was there to help because of the local county agent. It could be the horticulture or ag agent or home economist. It made no difference to me. They were the local agent. I would leave again at the end of the day. I wanted extension to be effective, to shine. But I had my industry as well. The horticultural industry with garden centers, nurseries, and landscape maintenance. The arborist for specific tree care. And the way I looked at them is that I wanted them to grow, get better, and increase their earning capacity. And I wanted Kansas towns, parks, and public grounds to become more attractive. A man learns in life that he or she cannot do it all alone. Oh yes, you can make changes like assisting a biology teacher of a school who has land and an old farm pond and is eager to take the students outside and show them what might be hidden under a rock. Or the bird's nest at the height the lecture book discussed, and not one nest but even another one, so to prove the point. Yes, at what height do most songbirds nest? And if you know that, what does that mean? So, what do you do in landscape planning for the new retirement community at the edge of town? The approach I took to my responsibilities in landscape horticulture was to increase public demand. I showed them in workshops what their yards could look like. I taught them how to achieve this. Sometimes I drew a landscape plan or I placed the house not on the spot they selected because it was such a beautiful location. Had they built there, the beautiful site would have been destroyed. No, I wanted them to keep enjoying the beautiful site, and I incorporated the house in a landscape so it would. People would realize that a well-landscaped home and site increases in value, and good farm layout makes working easier and safer. I could create and did create demand for services well beyond the responsibilities and capacity of extension. But now the horticultural industry steps in and delivers the services needed. They follow up and grow in the process. I've seen it happen over and over again, where a small business takes off. Yes, I've helped through extension where small business took a design job bigger than they could handle, and I would guide them with the design to make it good, functional, and economically feasible. Simply said, I saw my work as a catalyst, and that is how I had read my job description when I chose to come to Kansas in 1974. A time before computers in my field of expertise. The pencil was a mighty tool. All I needed was a piece of paper. I hold the best memories of my job. It was my responsibility, and I was part of a fantastic team. I'm sure not everybody always agreed with me, but there was respect. As specialist and so-called expert, you cannot fall back on a committee. When a field problem is presented to you, the other people step back and expect an answer from you. There have been occasions that I needed more time to find the right solution. Sometimes I needed my drawing table when the kitchen table was not enough. Today's computers and electronics are a great help, but one has to be on site to do the job right. I'm so glad that's how it was when I was in Extension. As specialist, know your subject matter and be able to explain clearly to many levels. Have people skills. Work as a catalyst to build up your industry and help them deliver. And love the state you work in.
Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That'll do it for this Wednesday edition. As always, thanks for tuning in. For Britton Rucker, Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.